CRRC-Armenia consortium, which is a worldwide partnership engaged in agricultural research for development. So if we provide research-based policy solutions to sustainably reduce poverty and hunger and malnutrition in many countries, and there is a corporate partnership between IFPRI and WFP, which results in collaboration in many countries on joint evaluation, assessment, scientific research on WFP programs. So now let me give the floor to Dr. Alderman for his lecture on making social protection nutrition sensitive. So Shnora Kalutun, thank you again to all of you for your participation, and we're looking forward to the fruitful discussion. Dr. Alderman, now the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased with this opportunity. One of the highlights of this very interesting 2 weeks I've spent here. What I want to talk about is how to use social protection, which is not generally considered part of nutrition. Is that? Do you want me to hold it? Maybe not. Okay, how's that? The issue is, why do we use social protection as part of the toolkit to address nutrition? And that comes a bit from the Lancet Review of Nutrition, where they took 25, 30 global experts on nutrition, said, what are the 10 best programs that we have the most amount of evidence on nutrition? What if we were to scale that up to cover 90% of the at-risk children in the world? What would that do? And their study said it would reduce stunting by 20%. Now, that's a major improvement, but it's clearly not what we want. We wanted to reduce it by, if you look at the MDGs, the SDGs, 20% is a fraction of what the goal is. So there needs for programs besides these 10 core nutrition interventions that will address the determinants of undernutrition, and that's where nutrition-sensitive social protection, among others, comes in. The potential for this comes, firstly, from its scale. Over the world, nearly 2 billion people receive some form of social assistance. In addition, the social assistance it's almost always poverty targeted, but it often enhances the role of women, empowering women who then can make better decisions on nutrition. In addition, many of these programs have design features which can be tied to nutrition-specific programs, and I'll give some examples as we go on. Finally, social protection increases productivity in the country, increases the growth of GNP, which in the long run will reduce undernutrition. And look, I mentioned the scale. Globally, if you look, the lighter figure is the most recent. Globally, over the world, countries have been increasing the expenditure on social protection all over the world. Coming a bit, unfortunately, on agriculture and transport expenditures, but the point I'm making is that the amount of expenditure, the share of budget that goes to social protection all over the world has been increasing. So we want to be able to use these expenditures more effectively. I should mention that when I'm talking here, I'm talking about safety nets, the core, the circle in the core. Safety nets are only a subset of social protection policy. Social protection policy includes child services, measures to decrease child labor. It also includes a number of social insurances, which the difference is social protection is usually you don't pay for it yourself. It's usually, while social insurance, you contribute As is an insurance thing, you contribute to a fund which when you retire or when you're unemployed, you then draw from. So social protection is a subset. It's a subset of the entire equity strategy in any given country. But if it's part of the equity strategy, and I've drawn it here as deeply embedded in it, you want to, of course, design it as effectively as you can. It's also something which is over the life cycle, from programs for pregnant and lactating women all the way to the elderly. Now, I'm going to discuss a little later on that becomes a dilemma, because choices have to be made at what type of program you want to put the majority of your resources. And in different areas, in different parts of the world, they make different decisions. And I will get back to that a bit near the end. Now, why? How would social protection, how can it affect nutrition? Part of it is basically that when you get more money, you buy more food. That's basic. I mean, that's been known for time immemorial. In addition, depending on the design of your social protection, it will increase your utilization of health services as well as purchase more food. In addition, and I'm going to give briefly some evidence on that, it turns out that people who receive social protection assistance tend to actually spend more on food than they would on other ways of earning income. And I said, there's examples. There's also that you can tie social protection programs to communication strategies on nutrition, as well as to fortify with micronutrients. And I will elaborate on that in just a minute as well. But it's important, it's central to understanding where social protection fits in, to realize that nutrition has multiple causes. The basic cause, and UNICEF has used the model for now a few decades, people have refined it slightly, but the model is the same. There are basic causes. The economic and institutional framework of any country are the basic causes, but there's underlying causes of malnutrition can be summarized in three categories: inadequate food, poor access to health and sanitation, and inappropriate child care. If you think of nutrition as food alone, you miss many ways of addressing undernutrition. And that is often how people think of undernutrition, as merely a lack of food. But it is more complex, and social protection programs that are designed to address nutrition bear that in mind. Income transfers, income alone, is not the entire story of undernutrition. And evidence from Armenia indicates that. This is from the 2010 Demographic and Health Survey. There's another one that's just being analyzed, but the story is likely the same. Not only has malnutrition increased slightly from 2000, but if you see here that even the highest wealth quintile, the people with the most amount of wealth that were surveyed, have high levels of stunting. Surprisingly high. And in fact, they have higher levels than some people who have less wealth. And this is even more of an issue for anemia. If you look here, as your wealth goes up, the chance that your child is anemic increases. This is from the 2005 DHS. I didn't see the data in 2010. I don't know how much that pattern has changed. But again, the same pattern is true for adult women, women who are bearing children and run risk of hemorrhaging during pregnancy. The wealthier women have a higher rate of anemia than the poorer women. I haven't seen this in many countries. This is a stunning pattern, but the pattern in general, that wealth and income doesn't by itself eliminate the risk of malnutrition, is a global pattern. Part of the story has to do with childcare, has to do with information about nutrition. And again, this data comes from DHS. You'll see the two numbers that I have in red. Exclusive breastfeeding, which is recommended globally, even in high-income countries. Only 35% of the Armenian population has exclusive breastfeeding. They have some, but not exclusive for those 5 months. It actually should be 6 months, but the way you collect the data is up to the 5 to the end of the 5th month. And then the minimum acceptable diet for, at the bottom of this, for weaning age children is also low. What that means is it's diet diversity and frequency of meals. A young child needs to be fed more than 3 times in a day because of the size of their stomach. This type of information needs to be conveyed, and it's something that doesn't automatically come with increased income. That's the reason why income is part, but not the entirety of the story. So, what do we know about safety nets? Again, from a global experience, safety nets are almost always targeted to the poor, and the ability of countries to get safety nets to the poor is pretty good all over the world by now. Usually the poor will spend half or more of any increased income on food. Okay, thank you. I was wondering. Okay, sorry. But I should mention there is not evidence that when somebody receives a safety net globally, they cease working. Now, this is something that I've heard people object to all over the world. Most safety nets are 5, 10, even in places like Mexico and Brazil, 25% of income. You can't live on a safety net alone, so you don't become idle because you get a transfer. It is a top-up to your labor. Also, I should say that the legends that go about, the anecdotes that people drink or smoke from this transfer of income, evidence isn't there. People who were smoking before, when they get a safety net, they don't stop, but they don't do it more because they're receiving a safety net. What they do more of is purchase food. Studies from all over the world say that somebody who earns a bit of money and somebody who gets a safety net of the same amount of money, the person receiving the safety net tends to spend more on food. It nudges them, even if there's no particular stipulation, it nudges them to focus on food purchases. It's a behavioral change. Some of it is due to increased access control of resources by women in some countries, but this is something, this nutrition labeling is global. It's been observed in, as I said, all over the world. There have been studies of cash transfer programs in Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Nicaragua, all of which document that people spend more out of safety nets on food than they do from other income. That's true in the United States on this food stamp program. It's been, for 30 years, it's been shown food stamps tend to be allocated particularly towards food purchases, even though in principle you can take the food stamps and spend it on food, and then take the rest of your money, which you were going to spend on food, and go buy cigarettes or something. It doesn't happen. But the downside of this, it's been documented in dozens of studies. People spend more on food out of safety nets. People tend to go more to health care centers when they receive safety nets. However, the data does not show that it increases anthropometric measures of nutrition as much as is expected. Anybody working in nutrition is disappointed and is trying to figure out why that is. However, it is well documented. This is from an early study of some of the cash transfers, conditional cash transfers in this case, in Latin America. people did growth monitoring. That's the big column in the center. People increased their health visits. They were sick a little less, but the reduction of stunting, which was the objective, was extremely small. Now this is a puzzle, and we're trying to explore, dig deeper in why this is. This is the same figure. This is, though, not just conditional cash transfers. This is unconditional cash transfers, even food for work. This basically, those gray bars are the statistical range of the data, but the average over these, I believe, 19 studies is virtually zero as far as changing in stunting. I was surprised to see this data. I hope that you're also surprised. Now, why is it? Okay, there are some lessons on that. When transfers are focused on younger children, and I said there is some issue on your age-based targeting, the impacts are greater. Often people are targeting towards children on transfer programs, children 0 to 5, when your growth velocity, your risk of stunting is greatest the younger the child. Nutritionists tend to focus on children under 2. So if you're providing a transfer to increase the nutrition of a children 4 or 5-year-old, you are not likely to have the same impact. If you require somebody who gets a transfer program that they have to go regularly to growth monitoring, and all you do is write down that data and then take it for the next person and the next person and provide no counseling, as is often done in conditional cash transfers, you check off a box, but you don't give any services to that household. Growth monitoring of recording information is not counseling. Counseling is very useful. One example of using this information, Peru, which has had a conditional cash transfer and found very little impact on nutrition, reorganized it. Instead of doing a program for people 0 to 5, they did it 0 to 3, as well as pregnant women, actually. They narrowed it down, and they spent more time on counseling, providing information as well as cash, and then the program had measurable impacts. The importance, again, is our behavior change communication, and in many cases, supplementary programs or complementary feeding of foods that are suited particularly for the dietary needs of young children, because the average family diet is different than the needs of a young child who needs a higher density of nutrients, again, partly due to the size of their stomach. I'll give 2 examples to go further on this. On behavior change communication, there's a study done recently in Bangladesh where they provided cash support to some households, and they provided behavior change communication to some households, and they provided both to some households. The households that received cash bought more food, but there was not a decrease of stunting. The households that got behavior change communication, they may know more, but they didn't have the resources to implement that knowledge. Only the households who had both the communication of nutrition information and the transfer showed that they had an improvement on height for age or decrease of stunting. That combination is much more important than either alone. On supplements, I mentioned that studies of conditional cash transfer have not seen impacts on nutrition. The one that is most studied in the world is the Progressa Cash Transfer Mexico. It was done in the 90s, started and still running. They changed its name a few times, but the program's still there. Initially, there was no impact on stunting, even though it's targeted to the poor. But if the households who received a cash transfer also receives supplementary food designed for children under 2. Those households improve their nutrition, particularly the children 12 to 36 months, not older. Another thing I've mentioned is fortification of safety nets, particularly if you're providing a safety net in terms of food itself. School meals are a perfect example of that. School meals are not in terms of cash, but in terms of food. Tends to provide an opportunity, a unique opportunity to get micronutrients to the household and avoiding any mandatory global nationwide fortification. One example comes from the Indian state of Gujarat, where the law said that the flour in 3 types of transfer program had to be fortified at the public grain distribution, the midday meal program, which is by Indian constitutional required for everybody, and in their main child care program, the ICDS. What they found when this program was done, it reduced inadequate iron intakes by 94%. It virtually eliminated inadequate iron intakes. Extraordinary impact, actually. And I should mention, very cheap. There was initial resistance. I don't think anyone in this room would be surprised that there's resistance to change of food policy. The resistance came particularly from small millers who would see that they would get increased competition from the larger mills. But they didn't say, hey, we're going to lose a budget. What they said is, you're going to get a food you don't like. The courts in India, which are very activist courts, said, no, that's not really the case. And when the program went in, surveys showed that people didn't even know there was a difference, that the food was not discolored, the taste did not change. As I said, what did change was the iron status. Yet, in India, where they've had 10 different programs, because each state has a separate program, of the 10 state programs that have been done in this century, 9 of them were discontinued. Has to do with budgets, and this is not just India. The issues are not technical. The issues are budgetary and government commitment. A good example is Egypt. Egypt has one of the largest wheat subsidies, flour distribution systems in the world, and has had that for decades. Recently, for a number of years, with the help of the World Food Program, it put in iron fortification in its flours. When the World Food Program's contract agreement, memorandum of understanding ran out, the Egyptian government did not pick it up. It just stopped putting the fortification in. And I believe it's waiting for the World Food Program to come in and pay for it. And until that happens, they may be sitting on the sidelines. Again, as I said, the issues are not necessarily technical. They are political, administrative in most cases. So, going back to foods, to school feeding. School feeding is only one of many. I've been talking about conditional cash transfers. School feeding is only one of a set of different type of safety nets. I won't even talk about public works, which in Africa is again a large type of program. I'll leave that off for this particular talk. But school feeding, you can consider it to be a conditional support. You have to go to school, and then you get a support from the state or from NGOs. Globally, something like 350 million children in the world every year are receiving school feeding at a cost of $75 billion. And this is in almost every country. Upper-income countries in Europe and United States, low-income countries in Africa, middle-income countries. It does not matter. School feeding is global. Generally, it's known they'll have an impact on school attendance. where attendance is low, where enrollment is low. In the United States, where enrollment is mandatory, it obviously will have no impact on enrollment because it's already 100%, an issue very similar to here. But the impact on nutrition of school meals is actually not that great. Nutritionists in general have some concerns about school feeding programs. Part of the problem is that the children in school are not in the age of risk of undernutrition. And, moreover, they are, in many countries, at the risk of obesity. The school feeding program in Brazil, for example, has been retargeted, reoriented to address obesity, to get diet diversity in there, because at this point that is the greater risk at the age of people who are in school. But in some cases, school feeding does address undernutrition in that there's two ways it does. One is that by giving resources to the school-age children, the households have more resources to share with younger siblings. And I've done a study which shows in Burkina Faso, which shows that if your brother or sister's in school and getting a school meal, the younger children have a reduced risk of stunting because the household has more resources in general. There's another way that school feeding can affect nutrition, and that's because at any age at all, children and adults for that matter, need micronutrients. And school meals provide an opportunity for iron supplementation or fortification. And again, I've been involved in this study in Uganda, which provided iron fortified flour. It was the baseline, the grayish bars, were prior to the program. When the program came in, we came back a year and a half later, that's the dark blue bars. Those areas, the first two, it's called SFP and THR here, just the type of program we had, anemia reduced. In the control group, that's the one on the right, anemia increased because these girls entered puberty, and a young woman in puberty has a high risk of anemia. She loses iron in menstruation. The program prevented that risk for those who were in the school feeding program. There are other ways innovative school programs can be a platform for nutrition-specific interventions. One set of studies in China, a school provided daily micronutrients. The children were provided tablets with the parents' knowledge, of course. And what they found is that the hemoglobin levels, that's the one measure of iron status, it's the easiest one to do, they increased. But more important, from the standpoint of the designers of this program, test scores increased. People who got iron supplementation did better in math. And those who had the lowest amount of iron in their blood at the beginning of the study improved the most. The dose dependency, as it were, a type of that. The same group of researchers did another study where they didn't provide any supplementation. They merely provided information to principals of the schools, and they said for some of them, we will actually give you a little extra money if you're able to reduce the anemia rates of your students. You figure it out. What happened is just providing information led to reductions in anemia as the schools knew more about it. Providing information and incentives to the principals led to greater reductions, as they had an incentive to transmit that information. But again, what it said is the school was used to provide information on nutrition, to use that opportunity in addition to the regular curriculum of math and language and literature, whatever else is studied in the schools, They provided information on diet to success. Another type of information that can be done in schools that can be linked with school feeding, although the program is not a daily program, and that is deworming. There's a particular famous study in Kenya where they provided deworming medicine to children in schools. They found that the children who received the program had increased attendance. Their brothers and sisters who did not receive the deworming medicine still had lower worm loads because there was less transmission. But more important, because they have now followed this for 20 years, those children who received the the deworming in school worked more as adults, and those who are in the wage market are earning wages 20% higher than those who did not receive the deworming medicine. The long-term impacts, the productivity increase of addressing these issues in school are measurable, which is what I want to discuss now. There have been a lot of studies, and this is an example of benefit-cost ratios of intervention programs. What a benefit-cost ratio is for every dollar you spend, how many dollars of benefits do you get? The higher the ratio, the more favorable. Unfortunately, everything, like everything else in the world, is not simple. If you're doing it, you have to say, $1 now is not the same as $1 20 years ago. If I tell anybody in this room, I'll give you $1 now, or I'll come back in 20 years to give you $1, you're going to say, I'd rather now. You come back in 20 years, I'm going to want $5 to make me worth that weight. That's called a discount rate. You don't directly observe, so any benefit-cost ratio of investing in nutrition where the gains are over a child's lifetime, you need to make assumptions. So you have to do sensitivity analysis. You also, if it's going to save a life, there are protocols of how to value a life saved. Now, I personally don't like to do that. I don't want to put any dollar value on a life saved. But sometimes for exercises one does, but let's just say this is the dolly. That is, for every year of life expectancy that's reduced, it's worth a certain amount of money. Basically, all you need to know in this, over these various sensitivity, is that all of these ratios are well above 1. Means that for every dollar you spend on micronutrient supplement or fortification or deworming or nutrition education, you get back far more than you paid over the long term. I'm going to dwell on this a bit because I think it's very important. I'm going to use an example from the Copenhagen Consensus. They've run a few of these, actually. They took experts in different fields, and they said, give us your best estimates of what are the investment possibilities in your field. And of course, somebody who's an engineer is going to argue for building dams. Somebody who's health is going to argue for health. So they got some judges who were supposedly neutral. A team of economists, including 3 who had Nobel Prizes in economics. So they know their numbers. By this committee's consensus, only addressing HIV/AIDS 2004 had a higher rate of return than investments in micronutrient deficiencies. Okay, they did this again. They took a wider set of issues. These are the type of issues they put the first time. Trade reform, migration, governance, not just in health, comparing across. But they did this again in 2008. They put a new committee together, 5 Nobel laureates this time. And they looked at 30 different interventions. Again, they are not in health and education alone, social sectors. They are what people call productive sectors. What they found is productive sectors are not necessarily the most productive. These are the top 10 investments by this committee. You'll see of the top 10, half of them were in nutrition of the different fields. micronutrient supplementation, fortification, research on micronutrients for agriculture, deworming, community-based nutrition programs. That had higher rates of return than trade reform, which many people consider important, politically debatable, but anyhow, you don't even see the roads and port rehabilitation in the top 10. They don't have the rates of return. Now, before I go on to change subjects a bit, I want to say that when I present this type of information to a minister of finance, they say that's all well and good, but we want roads because we want growth. It does not seem to get over the bias that growth is something where you can cut a ribbon as opposed to help a child become more productive. Why does it? Why do they become more productive? Because that's the issue we're talking about. Even if you leave out the fact that nutrition saves lives, and I think we should not deal with that in the economic analysis, not only because I don't want to put a dollar value on a life saved, but because fortunately child mortality is declining in the world. But that doesn't mean that there's still not a major reason to investing in nutrition, because it increases productivity. Well-nourished children, when they're well-nourished at 2, by the time they reach school, they enter school earlier, they spend more years in school, and they learn more in school. There is a well-documented link between nutrition and IQ. That's been true for breastfeeding, even in the United States and England, never mind low-income countries. It's true for iron fortification and for iron. Indeed, iron is one of the few micronutrients where you can show, even among adults, that productivity increases. They've done experiments where they've given iron supplementation to road workers, and the road workers achieve more soil moved or more feet dug when they're supplemented. It's one of the few cases where you can show that you can get in returns to your investment even when they're out of the childhood. Another type of program, changing subjects a bit, for school feeding is homegrown school feeding. I've mentioned that school feeding has the goal of improving nutrition in some places. It has the goal of increasing schooling, and it has the goal of being a social protection instrument. It's a transfer program. Addresses hunger. There's a new goal that is being done on homegrown school feeding, and it's one being considered variation in this country. It's to increase farmers' income and integrating communities into the wider national market. It comes with some trade-off. It has the potential of increasing the demand locally and therefore raising the income of small farmers. It has the potential, but it also has the risk. It's because fortification, if you want to do fortification, it's easier to be done centrally than decentralized. It's not impossible. You can address it either by, in the process of cooking, you can address it by diet diversity. Eggs particularly, meat. Those are very expensive. Very few school feeding programs actually purchase these and put them into their program. So there are some trade-offs that you have to consider. Another issue has to do in homegrown school feeding is, can you establish the contracting? Can the local communities get an assured supply? Now this is an issue, I've done a lot of work in Africa, where you have seasonal food shortages. And the local community can buy the food 2 months after harvest, no problem. 8 months, 10 months after harvest, they have a harder time. But this is a general issue, but this is again trying to get school feeding to have one more objective. But going back now to conclude on social protection and nutrition questions I'm going to put out for consideration. How in Armenia can you make social protection more nutrition sensitive? Generally, can you tie it to behavior change? Can it become a tool to encourage women to take counseling sessions, prenatally or when they've got an infant in the arms, to learn more about complementary feeding, for example? Can it be used? You're working now in Armenia at establishing social service centers. Get paperwork done, all sorts of administration things, you can do it in one place. Can you use those centers to provide nutrition information? There should be a question mark there on that slide. I'm raising these all as questions. Okay, you're talking now of having, in addition to the cash benefits, a top-up of family benefits for pregnant women and children. That current discussion, it's my impression, is to children up to 5. Since I think that children up to 24 months or 36 are much more responsive to these programs, every country, no matter where you are, has a limited budget. You spread out the same budget over more people, it's a smaller amount to the younger children. It's a question that is a political question. What are your objectives for these programs? If it is to increase your resources to the most vulnerable nutrition children, I would go for pregnant women 0 to 2 or 0 to 36 months, but not to 5. That's another issue. But those children who are 4 and 5, they are in kindergartens, many of them. If you want to, many of these kindergartens are community-based programs. They don't get the resources from the central government that the primary schools do. If you want to address the nutrition of these 4 and 5-year-olds, address the nutrition perhaps by addressing school feeding into kindergartens. That might address nutrition. It tends to have a greater impact than nutrition programs at age 8 and 9. It might also increase the enrollment, because right now you don't have 100% enrollment in kindergarten, although you do in primary and primary schools. And right now there are birth grants in the country. I haven't had the opportunity in my short visit to know how they work and what are their impacts on nutrition, but that's something that you may want to know. It's part of your social protection system. If you want to see its nutritional impacts, again, can you link it to behavior change communication? Okay, one final point to address. There are many different objectives with social protection. The primary one, all over the world, is poverty reduction. And poverty has no age limit. So countries have programs designed over the life cycle, as I mentioned earlier. However, if you want to take your limited budget and increase your nutrition resources, you may have to decide what share of your total budget goes to pensions, what share goes to households that don't have young children, and what share goes to households with young children. This is a global challenge. There's no one answer, but it is one that has to be considered if you want to match your poverty reduction with long-term productivity gains that can be established in nutrition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Alderman, for this very inspiring presentation. And now the floor is open for the discussion, questions and answers, and I'm sure there will be many. հաճախ ասում ենք, որ շատ ենք կարևորում քաղաքականության ուղղված կիրառական հետազոտությունները, եւ ես հիացած եմ այսօրվա հանրային դասախոսությամբ, որը ոչ լիճ առարկայական եւ քաղաքականության ուղղված տվյալների վրա հիմնված կիրառական հետազոտության փայլուն օրինակ է։ Տարբեր մեթոդներով հետազոտական արդյունքների հիման վրա քաղաքականության ուղղված բազմաթիվ առաջարկություններ, ըստ որում առաջարկություններ, որոնք հրավիրում են քննարկումների։ Եվ սա մեր անելիքն է, եւ ես այստեղ ուզում եմ մի քանի այդ հետաքրքրան, ովքեր հետազոտողներ են, ովքեր որ չէ, էլի հասկանան ինչի մասին եմ ասում, ցանկացած վերլուծաբանի եւ հրապարակող հեղինակի վարկանիշը որոշվում է նրանով, թե որքան են թիվում նրան։ Եվ ես պարոն Ալդերմանի համար երբ որ շնուհը սրճ տվեցի, պարզվեց, որ 79 թվից մինչև 2015 թիվը նրանց դիտումների տարեկան թիվը, հղումների թիվը 58 է։ Եվ այսպիսի մի գրաֆիկ տվեց ինձ Google Search-ը, որ իր հրապարակումները ինչ դինամիկայով են աճել, կումուլատիվն է, եւ պետք է ասեմ, որ այս ընթացքում, երբ որ ես բարեբախտությունը CRRC-ին բարեբախտություն ունեցա համագործակցելու Պարենի համաշխարհային ծրագրի հայաստանյան գրասենյակի հետ, ես անընդհատ հիացմունքով եմ նայում, թե ինչ ծրագրեր են ձեռնարկում, ինչ կերպ են այս ծրագրերի մասին հոգ տանում, եւ միայն այսօրվա հանրային դասախոսությունը կազմակերպելու համար հայաստանյան գրասենյակի ամբողջ անձնակազմը եւ Էրմինա Բաշինյանը եւ Լուկան եւ Դիգեն Լավոն Ավակյանը, որին անձամբ չեմ ճանաչում եւ մարդիկ հսկայական ջանքեր են թափել, եւ ես կարծում եմ, որ այդ ջանքերը ապատուն չեն անցել, ու ես շատ կզարմանամ, եթե շատ հարցեր չլինեն, որովհետեւ մենք ունենք շատ լուրջ խնդիրներ, ես նայեցի նաեւ խախտի համաշխարհային ինդեքսի համաձայնի տվյալները, որտեղից պարզվեց, որ Հայաստանը 60-րդ տեղում է։ Իհարկե կան երկրներ, որտեղ որ քաղաքի համակարգը շատ ավելի բարձր է, քան Հայաստանում, բայց այնուհանդերձ Հայաստանում է քիչ չէ, բայց նկատի ունենալ Հայաստանի ֆինանսական սուղ հնարավորությունները աշխարհաքաղաքական իրողություններով, եւ այստեղ եթե մենք խոսում ենք սննդի անվտանգության մասին, ապա մենք ունենք նաեւ անվտանգություն աշխարհաքաղաքական, որը շատ ավելի մեծ ռեսուրսներ է պահանջում, այնուհանդերձ այդ սուղ ռեսուրսները հասցեական ուղղորդելու տեսանկյունից ես կարծում եմ, որ այսօրվա դասախոսությունը լրջորեն ու երկար խոհելու տեղիք է տալիս, եւ ես հավաստիացնում եմ որպես հետազոտող, որ այն աղբյուրները, որոնց որ հղումներ տվեց դոկտոր Ալդերմանը, շատ օգտակար են եւ շատ կօգնեն նաեւ մեր ինքնուրույն հայաստանյան հետազոտողների կողմից վերլուծությունների խորացմանը, դրանց առաջ մղմանը եւ ի վերջո իրական սոցիալական փոփոխություններ հարուցելու։ Ես անչափ շնորհակալ եմ Պարենի համաշխարհային ծրագրի հայաստանյան գրասենյակի ամբողջ անձնակազմին, որի ղեկավարն է Մասկարնիշոն, եւ այն ավելի շնորհակալ եմ պարոն Ալդերմանին, որը ցույց տվեց հետազոտության եւ քաղաքականության փոխադարձ կապի շատ փայլուն օրինակ։ Շատ շնորհակալ եմ եւ պիտի իրոք հրավիրեմ ձեզ տալու ձեր հարցերը, այդ թվում նաեւ սննդի հարստացման վերաբերյալ եզրահանգիստիկ կան, եւ շատ լավ եմ, որ մեր հանրության մեջ դա շատ բուռն իսկապես մեծ բավականություն ստացանք, ես ներկայացնում եմ առողջապահական համագարքը, եւ իհարկե մենք ևս դիտակցում ենք, որ փոփոխությունները պետք է իրականացվեն եւ վարքագծային փոփոխությունների իրականացման միջոցով եւ ծրագրերի կրթման միջոցով եւ բնականաբար նաեւ դիտակցում ենք անհրաժեշտությունը սննդապահովման ծրագրերի իրականացման։ Ներկայումս Հայաստանում արդեն ստեղծվել են բազմաթիվ ռեսուրսային կենտրոններ, որտեղ իրականացվում է ծնողական կրթությունը, ծրագիր է մշակված ծնողական կրթության համար եւ նաեւ բազմաթիվ նյութեր են մշակված, թե վիդեո, թե տպագրական նյութեր, որտեղ որ տրված է բավարար հավաստի ինֆորմացիա դրույթ 5 տարեկան երեխաների ցնցման վերաբերյալ։ Սակայն գիտակցելով նաեւ անապահով ընտանիքներում բացի կրթությունից նաեւ սննդապահովման ծրագրերի անհրաժեշտությունը եւ կխնդրեի ելնելով ձեր փորձից բարձրաբանել, արդյոք այս ծրագրերը պետք է իրականացվեն գումարի տրամադրման միջոցով թե սննդի։
Actually, it was 4 questions. The first one asked 2, but okay. First, a trustworthy source of information. While it is well known that behavior change communication is part of any nutrition intervention strategy, counseling or providing information in public media, it is difficult. People are always going to trust their mother or their grandmother first, but there are various ways, and this is more the fact that this communication is important is not challenged. How to do it is very country specific. It has to be culturally determined. You have to find out what are the errors in the local diet. In some countries, pregnant women can't eat eggs because it's taboo. Once you know that, you can address it. In some countries, the child doesn't get fed if they have diarrhea. Each country you have to see where are gaps and address it. Then you have to have, ideally face-to-face is the best way, but now they're also working on using cell phones, SMS, messages. Did you take your iron? The women should take iron folate given out. All over the world it's given out to pregnant women and then it's left on the counter, or they take it once a week when they should take it every day. Reminders can become from your phone every once in a while. There are ways being explored. This is the same. The advertising community knows how to get people to change their behaviors. So if we had that same skill in the nutrition and health communities, we'd make great progress. Your second question, you mentioned golden rice. Golden rice is actually only one of a number of foods that are called biofortified. Golden rice is very controversial because it is genetically modified. However, there are many biofortified foods that are done with conventional breeding. With conventional breeding, they've made beans that have more iron, rice that has more zinc. And not only are these more nutritional, some of them have higher yields because plants need iron, plants need zinc just like people do. And these varieties are able to extract more from the soil, and then so they're higher yielding. So although I think that there is a role for golden rice in some communities that are particularly rice dependent, I think that there's a much broader range of biofortified that you don't have to go through the public relations issue of genetically modified, because there's many higher yielding and more nutritious grains that are now being produced through conventional breeding. It's still called biofortified, but it's not genetically modified. They're not the same thing. Thanks for bringing up the issue on emergency. It is an area young children. There are programs in Africa which are exploring lipid-based, high-density products. You may have heard of plumping nut, which is actually a therapeutic, but there's other products which are similar, which are not proprietary, which are less dense, less expensive, that have the same role. Very high dense in nutrients, designed for young children. If you do a package of food for relief in an emergency, perhaps those packages should include specific food for the at-risk young children. The research is actually mixed on this right now, but it hasn't been done in many situations. For obvious reasons, it's hard to do research in an emergency. As far as money, I mean, you talked about communication with the third question, but the specific question was much difference between providing money and providing food. There have been a set of studies, actually colleagues of mine at IFPRI with support from the World Food Program have done studies in a number of countries, Ecuador, Uganda, Bangladesh, Niger, all over the world, comparing transfers of equal value of cash and food. There's small differences. Sometimes the food you end up having, if you give food, you end up having more calories consumed, but a less diverse diet than if you got cash. My feeling is that the impact of these two modalities is very small. That's not the concern. The concern is cash transfers are generally cheaper to administer. Globally, the figure is about 15% cheaper if you have the banking and communication infrastructure to do it. So where those infrastructure and where that infrastructure is in place, cash transfers, you can get more resources to the low-income household because you spend less on moving grain around, storing grain, etc. But there are many places where it's not available. In that case, you still need food transfers when the markets are not functioning well. In an inflationary environment, food is inflation-proof, while cash is not. But in general, for long-term programs, the tendency now is cash transfers. People spend it just the same. People still spend it on food, and that evidence is pretty clear. More questions? More questions?
Dr. Alderman, I introduced myself before I'm the Brazilian ambassador. And as you as because in our presentation has a lot of experience in some of the areas that you were touching upon. We have a big school feeding program. Pascal and others and I'm dreaming that someday that probably will be able to assistance for maybe some of the experience here. We will. But what I wanted to mention is, in terms of source of information, that we have another area in which there's another area in which we are already helping America. It's a program with UNICEF. We helped create 3 centers in cities of Capan, Boris. It's unique. Maybe you have the experience of passing through, I don't know. But it's for providing expectant mothers with information on their nutrition, and then mothers with information on the nutrition of infants after 2 years old. It's only 3 centers in clinics in Capan, Boris, and Syunik, in the province of Syunik, which is one of the most affected by infant malnutrition. We hope to expand on that. But I was wondering if you had the chance of seeing it, or anybody else. But thank you for the presentation.
what are the outcomes, if any?
Okay, first question from the ambassador. Unfortunately, I haven't had much time in the country and I haven't had a chance to look at these centers, but it seems like it would be a very valuable process to look at what they've been able to achieve so that you would then be able to expand. One point that I mentioned, which sounds very encouraging, nutrition education is best done prenatally for two reasons. First of all, because nutrition prenatal influences the trajectory. I mentioned the iron folate supplementation as one example, but other aspects as well. The second reason why is because it is well known that breastfeeding practices are an important part, and you can't give training on breastfeeding practices with a mother of a 2-month-old child and get much results. One of the most important and simplest steps is to give the baby breast milk right after birth. The colostrums are very high in antibiotics, and no better way of getting the child's antibiotics than feeding them in the first 2 hours. If you don't do your nutrition education until they're coming to the first time they're getting a vaccine or something like that, it's too late. So this prenatal is the right time to begin the behavior change communication. The second issue about preferences or behaviors, well, there's a whole range. I mentioned how usually cash transfers still are spent on food. That is, it seems to nudge people into a better nutrition, better diet choices, even without any conditions attached. But the second point is on the behavior. It has to do, some of them you put incentives in, such as coming to the healthcare and conditional transfers is an incentive. But part of it, again, is, as I've mentioned a few times, behavior change communication. So it's a range of things. But basically, I'm saying that this example behaviors in economics, you have what resources you have, and then you have your preferences. Those combine to give you your outcomes. So when I'm talking about preferences behavior, it has to do with you don't just change resources, you also change preferences. You get a greater impact. The third point, I cannot answer about Central Asia or the Caucasus. I don't have experience there. But I can say that there are contracting done in many cases. Chile has one of the best school feeding programs in the world, and for years they've had it contracted. It's highly urbanized, which makes it easier. And the contracts are renewed periodically. So their performance, if they don't perform, they lose their contract. That helps too. In India, some places are done by contract, and some of those contracts are quite decentralized. Self-help groups of women are the ones who run the contract. Now, India, there are 1.2 billion people or so. Any project in India, you're going to have a mixed record. Some of them have worked very well, and some of them, they need to be reformed. But the potential has been proven. They just have to, like I said, tighten the administration in some places. But I can't talk about the region itself.
Just to add to this point and the difference between the different models of school feeding, there is a lot of research that has been conducted, also with colleagues from the IFPRI, because the drivers of costing and efficiency of the outsourced model versus the centralized logistic models versus the decentralized model, that is the one currently administered by the government of Armenia, are quite complex. So it's a research project of itself that WP corporately is trying to undertake with the expertise of researchers, but we're planning to do some studies also here in Armenia, and hopefully we'll be able to also advise on your question on the
I see one more question, please. We like stimulating debate, so don't hesitate.
Okay, my next question is about the like psychological aspects of recipients, children receiving food. So is there, what about the stigma or stigmatization, like within the class or within the school of providing the food? What are the mechanisms to fight that stigmatization?
Before thinking of questions, I'll answer this. There are many steps that need to be taken to avoid stigma. In school meal programs, you usually have everybody in the classroom receive a meal. In some countries, again, Chile is an example, but not the only one, you get a coupon. If you are poor, that coupon's free. If you are not poor, you pay different prices. Everybody presents the coupons look the same. So nobody has to know what you pay for that coupon. There are ways like that to try to anonymize programs. The United States now, our food stamp program is actually a debit card. It's not obvious unless you are really prying to know who's using those food stamps and who's not. All supermarkets accept it and they treat it just the same as any other debit card. So there are many examples over the world. Not every program can be, and as a matter of fact, sometimes it goes almost the other way. In the name of transparency, where you have programs where the well-off are getting programs designed for the poor, sometimes they do a public notice. These are the people, and that is not so much there is the risk of stigma, but it's the shame the people who are not eligible and know they're not eligible but are still getting programs designed for the poor. The public transparency you have to consider as well as stigma. They're balancing situations.
There are many international organizations operating in Armenia who are worried about malnutrition of children in Armenia. My question is the government of Armenia concerned about this problem, and how much is it committed to assault nutrition?
I can answer that very quickly. I have spent 9 days in Armenia. I'm brought here because I have worked in 40 or 50 countries, but I'm not in a position to make the comment about what the government of Armenia prioritizes.
Well, from all the discussions we had with the government is very well aware of the malnutrition problem in Armenia, and in Armenia we speak about the triple burden of malnutrition. It's not only stunting, but it's also overweight and obesity and micronutrient deficiency. So he is fully aware, fully committed. However, you also know the strong resistance to food fortification, which would be one way to address at least key micronutrient deficiency. And as the World Food Program, with the school feeding program, we used to provide, for example, fortified wheat flour as part of the food basket with many other food commodities. And we've been requested to stop importing fortified wheat flour and giving fortified wheat flour to the children, which we've done. I mean, that's the decision of the government based on the decision of number of people in the population. So the way to address it is maybe, as we discussed, one meal per day with a specific quantity. So this would be one way of tackling the issue. Another way of tackling it, and here we've been very much enlightened by the presentation of Professor Alderman, is the relevance and the efficiency of the combination of nutrition or nutrition-sensitive program with the behavioral change communication, with raising awareness among the various segments of the population along the life cycle approach. So this is one way of addressing also the issue. Now I can't answer more. I'm not part of the government, so it's just reflecting the very intensive discussion we had with the various ministries and ministries alliance since a year or a little bit more than a year that I have arrived. But I believe, and also maybe with the comprehensive food security and nutrition and vulnerability analysis that we've done jointly with NSS, with UNICEF, and where we diffuse largely the results, I think everybody is fairly well aware of the malnutrition and hunger issues in Armenia. Food insecurity and malnutrition, and as I say, malnutrition is various dimensions. And what is also very important to see is the fact that overweight and obesity doesn't concern the poorest population. It's also spread across the wealthiest group. So here again, it's a lot about communication, healthy lifestyle, healthy food habits. So that's where we are continuing our joint efforts, of course, with UNICEF, with the government, various ministries, with research institutions, and many partners possible. And maybe just to add, sorry, while we're still with the question on the emergency, there are many countries where, as part of the food package that is given immediately at the onset of an emergency, there is specific food for young children. It is an increasing habit, and it has become a policy within WFP. So at the very early onset of an emergency, the needs of the very young children are also taken into consideration. And then the relation also of how school feeding can be used also in an emergency to scale up very, very quickly any emergency response. Because when you have an already existing school feeding program in the country, you have a network of schools which are used to deliver food on a regular basis every day of the school year. So using these schools as a platform to scale up immediately, very rapidly, and tremendously an emergency response program has proven to be extremely relevant. And for example, one of the last countries with an emergency I have been was Haiti. And here we definitely use the network of the schools to
type of insurance is not done too often. It has been explored. The program explored it for drought response in Ethiopia when I was working in Ethiopia, but it didn't continue. And this is a different side of the time dimension. The earlier you get in properly, the earlier you can get out. I'm speculating on that.
Yeah.
Quite often, the usual duration of an immediate response to emergency is around 3 months. That's the average duration. Then that gives you the time to also see how the population has the ability to recover and the speed at which it can recover from any disaster that they have been facing. So after these 3 months, where you make sure that you prevent severe malnutrition and that you continue having the food security for the whole population. After that, then you look at the specific situation in the country. But indeed, it would be very interesting to look at that more specifically with a very scientific sample and study. If there are no other questions, are there any comments? I know there are members from the Parliament today as part of the audience, or as we've been inviting a number of members of the Parliament. So if there are any comments from any of the public agencies or the people in the room, I see one hand.
starting point is still globally that until you know otherwise, the human race tends to have a similar biology. But one can always and should always continue to monitor on any program to see whether there are untoward responses. But as I said, the economic and behavior issues, those always differ, and you have to design your program. Your communication, I said, you have to do your study of what are the current behaviors, what's the dietary preferences. Different countries have a different dietary preference. As far as the soil goes, yes, there are differences, and the agronomists are very, very good on this. They'll know some soils are too high in aluminum, some soils, mountain areas are almost always too low in iodine. These things are known, these things can be studied, and crops grown in an iodine-deficient soil will be iodine deficient. That is one of the reasons for biofortification, which, as I said, has been designed to extract more iron or more zinc from areas that are low in that. Conversely, areas that are high, I mentioned aluminum, you design crops, you breed crops that respond to a high aluminum soil. This has been done, it's more in agronomy. Your second part of your question, well, let me see your third, I'll go back to it, on GMOs. As I've mentioned, biofortification is a far broader topic. GMOs are a very small part of the issue. I will say just, the reaction to GMOs, my personal view, it was summarized in a chart in The Economist a year ago. One side of the chart said number of children who die of causes related to malnutrition every year, 3.2 million. Number of people who have been attributed deaths to GMOs, 0. As a nutritionist and as an economist, that benefit-cost ratio is clear to me. But I understand the political resistance, and since there are other tools to address nutrition problems, we can work with those other tools. As far as obesity goes, yes, it is a global issue and it is a rising issue. One of the problems, though, is we don't have anywhere near a clear evidence on what works as we do about addressing undernutrition. There are small programs of educating kids in school, small programs of increasing exercise. I'm currently working with a team of researchers on the impact of putting extra taxes on soft drinks. Whether that will have, it'll affect the soft drinks, we already know that. Whether it'll affect obesity, we don't know that yet. But so the issue is there. And you know that obesity is linked to huge expenses later on in life due to health issues. Diabetes is one of them, hypertension is another. But what works, that's still an awful lot of research needs to be done, unfortunately. I don't know enough about the Armenian diet, particularly the diet of these low-income households. Globally, I can say there is a tendency to try to increase diet diversity, but many of the issues for undernutrition have to do as much with the frequency of feeding, increasing the diet diversity. There's probably very different issues than what you need to address the risks of obesity later. But I don't want to discuss the Armenian diet
Շապարության նախարարություն, ասացինք, որ կան երկրներ, որտեղ նվիրված են այս ծրագրերը եւ որոշ երկրներում սնունդը տրամադրվում է կտրոններով։ Արդյոք կտրոնների պաշտպան պարագայում հաշվի են առնում թեկուզ դիաբետիկ երեխաների կամ ճարպակալումով երեխաների հանգամանքը, որովհետև օրինակ դիաբետիկով երեխաներին գիտեք որոշակի կոնկրետ սնունդ է ծծված, իրենց հացային միավորների եւ այլն։ Եթե ունեք դրա վերաբերյալ որոշակի տեղեկատվություն, լավ կլիներ դրա մասին կայք։ Շնորհակալություն։
Okay, there's one question as well. Most coupon programs, most food support programs are based on an experience of addressing undernutrition and hunger. They do try, many of them, rule out spending the coupon when it's a coupon. Often they're trying to control using soft drinks or junk food. But in general, it's considered not useful to try to force somebody because they can always say, okay, I can't buy the potato chips with this coupon. I'll buy my main food here and I've got a couple of dollars. I'll buy the potato chips elsewhere. You can't really control somebody's preferences by coupon restrictions. What you can do, though, goes back to nutrition education, and again, other ways, Mexico taxes soft drinks. They also ban the advertisements of snack foods on Saturday morning television when children are most likely young children. There are approaches like that, but I do not know of any approaches that use coupons to try to change diets. They explore that. But most of the time, the ones that I know of have dropped it as being practical.
So maybe it is time to close this very interesting discussion, and really thank you to all of you, and thank you to Professor Alderman for all these questions and answers and stimulating debate. Maybe just to encapsulate the discussion and also the way forward for all of us in this joint venture is social safety and social protection has an overall goal of really reducing poverty, and safety net is only a small part of social protection. And that's maybe one of the key issues that we've looked at through this presentation. Then we've been presented with a number of evidence, because as Professor Alderman was saying, having sufficient evidence is the starting point when you want to design a program. You look at the economic side, you look at the objective you want to reach, you look at the target groups, and then once you have all that, and once you know the possible impact of what you will have designed, this is when you choose the most appropriate program for a given country. And of course, it has to be country-specific, tailored with really the specificity of the country. So this is a venture that we've been engaging ourselves in partnerships with many other organizations, with the various line ministers and researchers, academics also all over the world, to support the country in building its evidence. So we started, as I was mentioning, with a comprehensive food security, nutrition and vulnerability assessment, what is the model, or what are the various models, depending on the location, on the specificity of the region, that we want to implement for the children of our country. I'm looking on the, I don't see anyone from the Ministry of Education, but basically this is a debate that we currently have, and we're here to support that debate with as many partners as possible, as many interlocutors as possible, and hopefully within a couple of years we'll have sufficient evidence and also studies to really support this venture and be much stronger in advising this maybe is the most appropriate model. And of course this is absolutely done in partnership. It's not one single organization venture, it's a group of organizations. Partnerships are really critical, and involvement of all the various parties, and I really do hope that we will have more of Professor Alderman in Armenia so that we can visit the centers that the Brazilian ambassador was mentioning, and also looking more, as you were highlighting, at the specificity of Armenia. So again, thank you very much, and maybe I will leave you the final word.
Շատ շնորհակալություն բոլորին ձեր ժամանակի համար, ձեր ուշադրության համար, պրոֆեսոր Ալդերմանին իր հետազոտության արդյունքները կիսելու համար, անշուշտ համաշխարհային բարենի ծրագրին, հայաստանյան գրասենյակին, ես քանի որ ես վստահ եմ, որ պարոն Ալդերմանը այս պրեզենտացիան, որ այսօր արեց, դա պատրաստական է կիսել, ավելին ես գիտեմ այն գիրքը, որ երեք ինձ նվիրեց բրոշուրը, դրա աղբյուրը օնլայն հասանելի է, եւ դրա հետ մեկտեղ բազմաթիվ ուրիշ աղբյուրներ, եւ ես վստահ եմ, որ press release-ը, որ Էրմիրա Բաշինյանն է նախապատրաստում, բոլորը կհասնեն այսօրվա միջոցառման մասնակիցներին եւ ապացուցեք հրապարակել պարոն Ալդերման դուք թույլ կտաք, որ եթե ունենան ծանրակշիռ հարցեր ձեզ գրեն կամ հասկացրեն Միշելին եւ ինքը հետո ձեզ գրագրի ժամանակը գտնեք արձագանքելու։ Ահա, ուրեմն համագործակցությունը տեղում է, շատ շնորհակալություն բոլորից, շատ շնորհակալություն ձեր ծրագրին, մեզ հետ համագործակցելու եւ անշուշտ համալսարանի հյուրընկալելու համար։ Բոլորից հաջողություն եւ հետևեք ձեր դիետային, ձեր սննդին, ձեր քաշին, ձեր փորին, ձեր զարգացման միջոցներին։